Howdy YouTube, Unky Joe here, Unky Joe's Playhouse. Welcome back to Unky Joe's Playhouse. Today we're going to take a little tour of the Windows Lab. Well, actually we don't have a Windows Lab. I went through some Windows Lab videos and kind of showed you DNS, DHCP, but I'm going to set up a lab within my corporate network here, and I'm going to show you. I'm not going to take you, it's not a soup to nuts tutorial. I'm going to go through it fairly quickly. I'm going to share with you some theories on how I'm going to set it up, and then I'm going to show you how I set it up and make it work. So buckle up, this is probably going to be a long video. What we're going to do first is we're going to start with talking about how we're going to set up a network for this Windows Lab. So my current corporate network is on the subnet of 192.168.5. whatever. That's a subnet I'm using with a 254 or with a 285.285.285.0 subnet mask, which means out of that range of address I'll get 254. That's typically what I use for most of my clients, is a 192 network, and you can play with that subnet mask and get any number of IP addresses and host numbers you want out of that. You just need to do a little bit of math. Ideally, what I want to do is, when I create this lab network, is I want to put it on a separate subnet. So say for example, I don't want it on my 5 subnet, I want to put it on a 10 subnet. When I say the 10 subnet, I mean 192.168.10.0 whatever, 10.1 through 254 would be available to me. And what that allows you to do is isolate your networks, because if you have multiple DHCP servers running on the same network, you're going to run into a problem. There's a couple ways to do that. You could pop a new NIC card in. I could use one of the 4 NIC cards on my my Dell server. I have one of them connected to the 5 network, so what I could do is just connect the other one to the 20 subnet and use that network card. But say for example, you don't have the resources at your disposal that I do. You don't have multiple network cards in your server. Well, there's another way to do it too, and that's called with a VLAN. So I'm going to cover walking you through my Ubiquiti setup and how I create a VLAN and the steps I take to do that. And then we're going to go through, we're going to go over to the Dell machine, and we're going to actually create a Windows Server 2016 installation, and we're going to set up the DNS, DHCP, and Active Directory. So buckle up, we're going to get started right now. Alright, so I've kind of already set this up on my Unify kit. If you've seen my Unify videos, you know I now have a Unify 24 port switch. I have a Unify 8-port power over Ethernet switch on the desk behind me. And I have the Unify USG gateway, and I have the Unify access point on the wall right up here under my finger. And the reason I decided to go with Unify is because it's all one package and all managed through one piece of software. I've been very happy with it. Check out my Unify videos for more information on that. But let's switch over here to Unify real quick, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now what I need to do is I need to create a separate subnetted network. And this is part of the reason I went with Unify products. They just make it so easy. If you've ever had to deal with VLANs and worry about trunk ports and what's a tagged port and what's an untagged port, you still have that under Unify, but they really simplified the process for making this work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out and we're going to create a new network, a new corporate network for this whatchamacallit we're going to be setting up, so that we don't have a conflict between the 5 network and the 20 network or the 10 network or whatever. And it'll be clear to you as we walk through this configuration. So the first thing I want to do is come over here to my Unify software and come down to settings here, and I want to go into networks, because what I want to do is create a new network. Now you see I've already got a couple of networks on here. My main network is the 5 subnet. So when I for the 5 subnet, just drop those last numbers. So this subnet identifier would be 192.168.5.0/24 would be the actual how you refer to the subnet. And I have a guest network up here for my wireless clients that I've already set up. But what I want to do is create a new corporate network, is what Ubiquiti calls it. So what I'm going to do here is click on Create New Network, and I'm going to call this MCS, and we'll call this Lab 1. Okay? This is going to be a corporate network. And I'm going to give it a VLAN ID of 20 is what I've decided to go with. And then what I'm going to do is do 192.168.20.0/24. Okay? Now, here's the deal. I don't want to use Ubiquity's DHCP server. I want it because we're going to have we're going to have our own DHCP server. So I'm going to call this mcslab.local, because that's what we're going to have our domain name be, is mcslab.local. And then I'm going to tell it no DHCP mode right here. Okay, because what I want to do is I want to assign DHCP only to my server on the 2016 server. So I'll have available addresses of 20.1 through 20.254. And actually the gateway will be this unit right here, the 5.254. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this. Pardon me, it says it's not a valid subnet. I need to put a 1 in there. 20.1, blah blah blah, MCS Lab, no DHCP, save. Yes, okay, so it was created. So now if we go out and we monitor the devices, you'll see it's provisioning all of them. So what it's doing is it's sending all that information to both my gatekeeper, my 2 switches, etc. And once it's done, it'll come back and say it's connected again. So we'll let that finish. Okay, so everything's done provisioning, so now we should be able to carry on with the actual configuration. Now that was easy, wasn't it? Okay, and I'll show you how all that works together as we move along. But if I had done that on a regular, a Cisco switch or whatever, I might have had to go out to a command line. If I had done it on my old Link switch, I would have needed to bring up a web interface and go through there. The thing about the Unify, they make it as simple as possible. They kind of Fisher-Price operating system it, if you get my meaning. So all right, well, let's work on the next part of this, and then we'll come back. All right, so now I'm going to switch over to my Dell server, the second Dell server that I have. I have a production Dell server, and then I have a lab Dell server. So this is my lab Dell server. So let's switch over to that and show you what I'm going to do. Now the first thing I did was I copied the Windows Server 2016 ISO installation file over to a local hard drive on my lab unit, on my lab Hyper-V unit. I put it on the P drive and I put it under ISO, and there it is. So that's a server install CD that we're going to use to create a virtual machine. Now, bear with me a second. I'm going to move some stuff around here and just make it work a little bit better here. I haven't quite figured out OBS Studio yet. We'll get there. Life is a learning process. Put me in the corner right there. All right, so let's go ahead and choose Hyper-V Manager, because we're going to create a new machine, and I want to walk you through that. Okay, so the machine, I've already got these lab units here that we've created eons ago and have been backed up and restored and exported and imported 1,000 times. But what we're going to do is create on MCS HV, that's my hypervisor machine, we're going to do a new virtual machine. Okay, click next. Now this is going to be a 2016, we'll just call it 2016-Lab1. Alright, next we're going to do a generation 2, next, and I'm going to give it 2 gig of RAM to start up with, and we'll give it a network card. Even though this says LAN subnet 5, worry not. We'll just go ahead and keep the default to create a 127 gig hard drive. Now normally what I like to do is I like to go out here and put these hard disks into folders. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a new folder under virtual hard disks and call it 2016 Lab 1. It's just because I'm sorry, I did it the wrong name. It's only because I'm an organizational freak. I just hate virtual hard drives that are out there that, you know, nobody's quite sure where they belong, so I like to put mine into folders. 127 gig is fine. I'm going to install the operating system later, and now I'm going to click on Finish. Now, one very important thing I do whenever I create a Generation 2 virtual machine is I always go back into Settings. So I'm going to do that here. I'm going to right click on it, go into Settings. A couple things I'm going to do. I'm going to disable Secure Boot. That's one thing I'm going to do. And then I'm going to add a DVD drive here under the SCSI controller. So click on Add, and it's going to be an image file. And then we're going to browse to that P drive where I created where I copied the ISO, and then we're going to go ahead and apply that. Now, what we need to do then is move DVD drive up and hard drive up. So I want it to boot off DVD drive first. If that doesn't work, then the hard drive. If that doesn't work, then the network adapter. Now, some people will say you need to enable secure boot, but I don't. Not in a lab environment. If you want to enable that, that's fine. But you could have some problems getting things to boot. And then I'm going to go ahead and give it 2 virtual processors just because I can. I got lots of virtual processors. In fact, let's give it 4. Why the hell not? And we'll up the RAM later after we get it installed. But to get it installed initially, we should be good. And I'm going to tell it OK. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on the machine. I'm going to tell it Connect. Now, think of this as just like another PC sitting at your desk or underneath your desk. And this is your screen view of it. So all you have to do here is just simply turn it on, power it on, and it will prompt you to press any key to boot from the DVD-ROM drive, the ISO image, which is what we're doing now. Alright, so we're going to do English, US. I'm going to click on Install Now. Alright, I'm going to tell it I don't have a product key. You can run Windows without a product key. You just get the little nag down there. And I don't know that I'm going to add a product key to this, but because I don't want to use up all my product keys. But for now, I'll just tell it I don't have one. Now, what I'm going to do is Windows Server 2016 Standard Desktop Experience. In other words, that gives you a GUI. I always just use the GUI. And I'm a GUI guy, you know that. So we're going to click on Next. We're going to accept the license terms, of course. We're going to read them first. I always do a custom. I'm going to choose that unallocated space on that virtual hard drive. Click on Next, and we'll let it go. All right, and we'll come back when this part of it is done. Well, that was fairly quick. I think it took all told about 10 minutes to load it. So let's go ahead and go through the initial configuration. And I'll talk a little bit. I'll try to talk a little bit while we're doing the configuration, because it always takes a minute for it to bring up this screen. You're probably wondering why would you want to do and I'm calling this a Windows lab because it is a Windows lab. But you're probably wondering what the benefit is to you. If you're an IT guy or if you're studying stuff, you know, you never want to tinker with stuff in what they call a production network or a live network. You want to have a sandbox or an area to play in, and that's why I got these Dell servers, so that I could set up a virtual environment and with virtual networking and everything else. It's just taken me, as you can see, well over a year to get all the pieces to come together. And now that I have them, I can actually do some of the videos that I wanted to do that pertain to it. Now this series of videos is going to be strictly focused on Windows, but I could in theory do Linux servers as well. And we are going to be getting into some Linux, where we may even do an ESXi server to where I can show you an all Linux under the hood kind of virtual network. But for now, we're working with Windows. So I'm going to share with you some of the tips and tricks that I used. So if you're new to Active Directory, if you're new to Windows Server, and you have an opportunity, say, to be hired in a position, the best thing you can do is spend some money on, like I said, $200 on one of those Dell servers, and just get in and start building your own virtual network and virtual lab. so you can get in and play around and break stuff, because that's the only way you're going to learn, is to break stuff, is by mistakes and learning from other people's mistakes. So, okay, I've gone on long enough as to why we're doing this. I'm going to go ahead and press Control-Alt-Delete, and hopefully it'll log me in. Now, even though we want this to be on its own subnet, when it initially comes up, it's going to be on subnet 5. That's going to be its IP address until we do a little magic behind the curtain, as they say. Now remember, we want this network to be on its own subnet because I don't want it to interfere with my actual production domain, which is on the 5 subnet. So I'm going to show you what's going to happen here when we initially, if we ever get up to the main desktop. We're going to go out and look at what IP address it's got, and then I'm going to change a couple of things, both on this virtual machine and on my Unify software, and show you how what effect that change has. Now, the first initial boot up of either Windows 10 or Windows Server 2016 after you've installed it can be lengthy. It's doing a lot of stuff in the background. So. And you can see, here's evidence of that. It asked me, hey, you're part of the MCS, do you want to be part of the MCS local.network? For now, I'm just going to tell it yes, just to make my life easier. And you'll see where we make the changes here shortly. And now, the first thing that's going to happen is Microsoft loves to bring up their little wizardy kind of server manager interface. And this thing has its uses. I'm old school, and I prefer the old school way of using things. But what I'm going to do is show you how I go through on Server Manager, just because it comes up, All right, so Server Manager's up, so what we want to do is go over here to Local Server. And again, the first time you boot up your server, it's going to be a little sluggish and a little slow. Now, from here, we can pretty much configure everything. Once it populates, we can configure everything we need to right here from the Server Manager, and that's the idea, that's why Windows put it in there. But I'm not a big fan of it, but again, I'm going to walk you through everything on here and show you some of the shortcuts as soon as it updates here. And you can see, even though I've given this thing quad processors and 2 gig RAM, the slowest part of this is the virtual hard drive. So it'll get faster as time goes on as we do more things, but initially when you bring up the Server Manager, it can be a little slow. Alright, it only took a few minutes for it to populate this screen. Now the first thing I'm going to take you to is right here where it says time zone. It's very important when you're setting up a domain controller or an Active Directory. Time sync is very important on a network. If you don't have your time zone set right, your clock set right, your workstations will have problems logging into your Active Directory domain controller. So it's very important that time is correct on your server at all times. So the first thing I'm going to do is go over here and change this to Central Time by clicking the time zone. So I'm going to do Central Time, US and Canada, and you'll see now it gets the correct time of 2:31. Tell it OK. Now, it's not going to update until we click this little, oh, it updated immediately. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So if we just look around here, you can see that we've already been given a name, a work group, it turned the firewall on. It's enabled remote management, but disabled remote desktop. NIC teaming is disabled. And looky here, IPv4 address assigned by DHCP. So if I were to click on that, it should bring up the network controller. Then if I right click on the network controller and go to status and details, I should be able to see, and you can see it's on the 5.subnet because I got a 5.29. And it's looking at my DHCP servers. So this is looking at my corporate network. But what we want this to do is actually look at my VLAN, which is VLAN 20 on the 20 subnet. So I'm going to show you how we're going to do that here in a moment. Now just let me make sure I don't need to change anything else before I shut this server down. And I think we're good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and close Server Manager, and I'm going to go actually shut down the server. Actually, an really easy way to do it is just go Action, Shut Down, and it'll go ahead and go through a regular shutdown on Windows. Because what we need to do is I want to switch over, and it'll close this in a minute. What I want to do is switch over to to Chrome, and I want to go back over to Bear with me while I get over to that window. Right here I am. So what I want to do is I want to go back down here to settings and go to my network. And remember, we turned off the DHCP server, but I want to show you what happens. If I go back in here, let's see if I can enable, yeah, I can enable the DHCP server. So I'm going to update the range. So it'll start giving out 20.6 through 20.254 as an IP address. All right. I've just enabled it, and I'm going to click on Save. Now what it's going to do is it's going to go out and it's going to re-provision all my devices. So while that's going on, let's go back to our hypervisor. Bring that up. And we're still shutting down. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go edit one setting. So I'm going to go to File, bear with me, File, Settings. And under the network adapter, I have Vlan Identification is available. So I'm going to turn that on, and I'm going to tell it it's on VLAN 20. This is the beauty of Hyper-V or any virtualization software that has VLAN identification in it. It used to be you would have to have multiple network cards in there, and even though I do in that Dell server, I don't want to have to run multiple network cables and plug them into a port. So if I just put a VLAN identifier in here, even though this is on subnet 5, the switch and the Unified Security Gateway will tell this the information it needs to be on VLAN 20, and that it needs to go get an IP address from a VLAN 20. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this, tell it OK, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the virtual machine back on and let it boot up. So now when I boot up my 2016 server, you notice it says it's discovered a network. And it asked me if I want it to be discoverable. So I'm just going to go ahead and tell it yes for the sake of argument. And then we'll wait for Server Manager to come up. And I'll show you what that one little change in the VLAN identifier has done to this machine. And so now if we come over to Server Manager and we go to the Ethernet and click on that, you see it says assigned by DHCP. And if I right click on it and go to Status and go to Details, you'll notice that it is automatically given us an IP address of 20.6. So it's actually put us on the 20 subnet just by clicking that VLAN identifier. That's how easy it was to create a VLAN and then to tell Hyper-V to use that. So with that in mind, now keep in mind my Ubiquity security gateway is giving out these IP addresses. And we don't want it to do that in the long term, but in the short term, just while we're getting everything configured, I'm going to close on that, and I want to go out to a command prompt. I'll go to search and do it like this, and I'll go out to a command prompt. And I'll right click on that, and I'm going to run that as an administrator. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is I want to ping my gateway. So let me get over here. And you remember our gateway was 20.1. Alright, so I'm getting a reply from the gateway. Let's see if I can actually get onto the internet. So let's ping Google's DNS servers just as a start, and bingo, I get a reply. So not only are we getting to our 20 subnet, but we're getting out to we're able to get to the gateway, which is the Unified Security Gateway, and we're able to get out and ping our DNS server. Now what happens if we ping google.com? So we see it translates the name into an IP address, transmits it, and we get a response. So we know everything is working on our Unified Security Gateway. It's giving out an IP address, it's giving out the subnet, it's giving out the DNS, it's giving out the gateway, everything it needs to get a computer on the network. Now then, that was just a proof of concept to show you how easy it is to set up a VLAN with Unify, and then how to, with the use of a single NIC card, that is not only serving my 5 subnet, but it's now serving my 20 subnet. And Unify is keeping all of that stuff separate. Actually, that's a bit of a lie, because if I were to ping an IP out on my production network, I get a reply. There is a way in Unify to isolate the two networks, but I want them to be able to talk to one another, but I want them to have separate DNS and DHCP, if that makes sense. So just keep following along, and I'll explain to you what that means. So if I come back to Ubiquiti's Unify software, and I go over here to Clients and All, you'll notice down here at the bottom I have the name of that machine, and you'll see that it's a 20.6. So not only does it show my production network and all the PCs and Internet of Things that are connected to it, my TiVos, etc., it also shows my other subnet, which is 20, the 20 dot whatever subnet. So you can see how handy Unify is when it comes to doing VLANs. That's probably the easiest VLAN I've ever set up in my life. And I don't need to worry about trunk ports right now. I don't need to worry about tagged and untagged, because as stupid as I am, Unify is smarter than me and can handle that stuff. But what I do need to do is I need to turn off that DHCP server. So we're going to go back to settings. We're going to come back to networks. We're going to go to the lab network, and we're going to turn off that DHCP. So we're going to tell it none. We're going to click on save, and then what's going to happen is it's going to re-provision the switches and the gateway, and then I'm not going to be able to get an IP address from that Unify as a DHCP. So it's saying it's provisioning, and Unify is always the last one to provision. So while that's going on, let's come back to our hypervisor machine, or to our 2016 machine, and we're going to close those windows. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hard code an IP address instead of having it get an IP via DHCP. So I'm just going to click on this right here. I'm going to right click on this Ethernet controller, go to properties. I'm going to go to TCP IP4, and I'm going to tell it this is 192.168.20.1. It's going to fill in the subnet for me. Actually, I can't use 20.1 because my Unify is at 20.1. Let's just verify that. Let me get where you are, where you guys are seeing. Because if I go here to settings, networks, we started this at 20.1. What we should have done, because I like my gateway to be out at the end of the network, I should have done 254. So we're going to change this and make it 20.254. Let's see if that works. Yep, it looks like it worked, and now it should be provisioning all these devices. So you can see I've got my gatekeeper here at 5.254. I want my gatekeeper for the 20 dot network to be at 20.254. So that's why I went here, back to networks, and changed that to 20.254 and turned the DHCP off. So now we'll leave it up here on clients. We'll come back here to the, bear with me, to my hypervisor. Now this machine can have 20.1 as its IP address. And I can fill in 192.168.20.254 as the gateway. Now I'm also going to use 20.254 as the DNS server. And we'll see if that works. Now this is going to change because we're going to be installing DHCP and DNS and all that good stuff. So this will change. But for now, I'm hoping that'll be good enough. Okay, so it looks like it took that. Let's just go back and check our details. 20.1, 20.254. So now let's go back out and see if we can run a command prompt. So first of all, let's ping the gateway. 192.168.20.254. And we get a reply. Now let's see if we can ping Google's IP address of their DNS. And we can, so we know it's making it out through the gateway. and let's see if it translates DNS into IPs, and it does. So let me come back to the webcam here for a second because I want to talk to you. If you knew how unbelievably complicated this was prior to Unify putting out this latest release of their software, well, go out and find the videos for yourself. Do a Google search on VLANs, inter-VLAN routing, watch a couple of videos, you'll see how complicated it can be. And the problem with me is getting the terminology, you know, determining whether a trunk port or a tag port are the same, or an untagged port, or an egress port, or all this. And all these manufacturers have different things that they call them. This is why it's easy to get, it can get overly complicated and confusing. That's another reason I'm using the Unify products in this lab, because it's going to make setting up this lab so easy. I've done a few clicks and boom, I've gotten around and do what I need to do. And granted, I'm not a command line guy, but if I had to do this on Cisco or through the web interface of one of those Linksys switches, oh god, it would have been horrible, because I've done it before. So I know I'm tooting Ubiquiti and Unify's horn, but there's a reason for that, because they work. So we know we've got our network squared away now. So now let's go ahead and give this machine, let's give it a proper name. So rather than it being win whatever, we're going to click on that. Now it's a little bit misleading. You would think you put it here, but no, this is the computer description. You have to click on this button here to change the actual name. So we're going to call this, what, 2016-Lab1 is what I decided. Oh, I keep putting an underscore instead of a dash. Bear with me. Brain fart. Lab1. Call it anything we want. I'm going to click on OK. Now, anytime you change a computer name or the work group or anything, it requires a reboot. So we'll let that go ahead and restart, and we'll come back when that's done. Now, I want to show you something. I rebooted that 2016 server, and if you look way down here at the bottom on my Unify screen, you'll now see it identifies it as 2016-Lab1. Now, I did that by going out and editing, putting an alias in there so that I knew the name of the machine. It shows its IP address of 20.1. It shows it's on the MCS Lab 1 network, not the MCS. You notice all these are part of the MCS network. And it shows it's on the 24 port main switch, port number 14. Look who else is on port number 14 though. Right there. MCS-HV. It's on the 5 subnet and it's on the MCS network. How is that possible? Well, because we're doing VLANs, we're doing virtual networking. So you can physically have two computers use the same piece of cable and have completely different IPs and configurations. That's one of the mainstays of that's why routing and switching is so important on a network, so you have the flexibility. And later, as we go on down this, we'll learn how to isolate this network from this network so they can't see one another. Or perhaps we just want MCS to be able to see MCS Lab and not the reverse of that. But I just wanted to show you that's one of the things about Unify products. If I was doing this on standard hardware or whatever, I would be honestly lost, because I've never successfully been able to set up a VLAN on one of those. This one was intuitive and I had no trouble at all. So now we're back to our server manager, and we see we've got, it now shows us the IP address because we're not on DHCP. So what we probably want to do now is go ahead and set this up as an Active Directory domain controller on its own network. So I'm going to go through that next. So I'm going to go up to manage, and I'm going to let me just check here. I want to make sure I don't need to change anything. I don't want to do updates yet or anything like that. Just make sure I don't want to change anything before I go and run this wizard, and I don't. So I'm going to go to manage, and I'm going to add roles and features. I'm going to click the next button. It's going to be a role-based or feature-based. It's going to be on this server. You notice it doesn't show any other servers because it doesn't see them. They're on a different subnet. So it doesn't see my production LAN. It's not going to either, unless I were to tell it to. Okay, so what I want to do is, I believe it's Active Directory Domain Services is what I want. And when you do that, it picks all these other items below it to install. And I'm going to include the management tools. So I think that's all I need to do for now, because I think on the next one it's going to take me through and warn me about a DNS. And okay, I definitely want, now it's asking me what other features do I want, and it selects group policy management, net framework, remote server admin tools, SMB1, file sharing. It's the older SMB just for backward compatibility, Windows PowerShell, WoW service, etc. Next. Okay, Active Directory stores information about users. So it's basically a database that stores your information about the users, the computers, and other devices on the network, and it helps you administrate them. And we're not going to use Azure. Okay, so these are all the software that it wants to install. So I'm going to go ahead and tell it install. All right, we're going to let this run because it's going to take a little time, and I'll come back if any new messages come up, and so that you can see them as they appear on here. So it says feature installation, configuration required, installation succeeded. It's telling me I can close the wizard, so that's what I'm going to do. But if you notice now, I have a big yellow exclamation point up here, so let's click on that and see what that is. Oh, configuration required for Active Directory domain services at 2016-Lab1. Promote this server to a domain controller. Well, let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so we're going to add a new forest is what we're going to do. And we're going to call this MCS lab.local. I don't know if I have to put the... Oh, we'll just use MCS lab. I'm not going to put the .local in there. Nope, it needs it. So we'll have to do a .local. Now, some people say don't use .local. Use a real... Use something other than .local. I've never run any problems using .local. Do your research and your mileage might vary. Choose what you want to do. So it tells me now it needs DNS and it needs to be a global catalog server. Let's see, forest functional level. Wow, Windows Server technical preview. That's interesting. I have never seen that before. I'm just going to leave it selected. I suppose that's this version of 2016 server I had is not a technical preview, so I don't know why it's saying that. It should say server 2016. But in theory, what we could do is use a lower functional level if we had other servers in our network, and on this lab we don't. So I'm just going to leave it set at that, and then I'm going to create a restore password in case I need to restore my Active Directory if I foobar something later down the road. And I'm going to click on next. Now it says the delegation of the DNS server cannot be created because the authoritative parent zone cannot be found. Don't worry about it. And then what it should come up and say is MCS lab without the .local on it. And it does. So we'll click on next. And since we're only using one hard drive, we're going to keep, and it's a small network, we're going to create the Active Directory database on its own, on that local drive. If you had a really big server and multiple drives in there, normally best practice is to move those off to a separate drive. Alright, and then it tells me here's all the stuff it's going to do. Now, if you're a PowerShell user, they have this neat little button here called View Script, and if you click on it, here's the PowerShell script. So you could, in theory, save this script and create a template out of it, and then all you have to do next time you do a server is just come in here and change the names, and bing bang boom, run the script, and you're done. You don't have to go through this GUI if you prefer not to. I like the GUI. So I'm going to go ahead and click on next, and we're going to see if it meets the prerequisites for domain controller operation. And it even tells you if you click install, the server automatically reboots at the end of the promotion. Okay, so it's telling us about the cryptography algorithms and a delegation, but otherwise everything passed. So I'm going to tell you you can safely ignore these two for now, and I'm just going to click on install. Okay, this is going to take some time. So we're going to let this run, and I'll come back when something pertinent to our install comes up. So it's warning me, now that it's been successful, that it's going to restart. So we'll let that restart, because now when it restarts after you've installed Active Directory domain services on there, it can take 5-10 minutes for the server to come back up to the login screen. So just be aware of that. Be patient, have a little patience, let Windows do its thing in the background. No news is good news when it comes to Windows, and wait for that login prompt to appear. So we'll come back after it's done its initial configuration. Alright, well, it's come up to the login screen, so now we need to see if we can log in. Now, this login is going to be a little bit differently. And why Microsoft, they've had this ever since Windows NT. See, even though you've joined a domain and made this machine a domain controller, it still wants you to, well, actually, it looks like they have changed it. I'll be ding-dong danged. That must be something new on Windows, because before what it would do is just come up as administrator. Now it's actually appending the MCS Lab, the domain name, with a backslash before the administrator name. That's very cool. So what I was going to tell you to look out for is not valid anymore. So I'm just going to go ahead and log in. Now again, keep in mind, this is, even though you've logged in before, you haven't logged in as the domain administrator. So it has to go out and create what's called a user profile for you the first time you log in under as a domain controller. And then the next thing it'll do is bring up Server Manager. So I'm going to cut the video here briefly while it brings up Server Manager. So we've been successful, we're back up and running, and if we look at the properties for the Server Manager local server, we'll see that our computer name is correct. Our domain is correct. Our time appears to be correct. The firewall is on for the domain. One thing I like to do though is I like to click here and turn on remote desktop. And I like to turn the firewall off. Now, some people are probably sitting on the other side of their keyboard and screaming, "Why in the hell would you turn off the firewall?" Well, I have my reasons. I really don't like Windows Firewall. I think it gets in the way more than it helps. In certain circumstances, it can help. But in the circumstances I'm using it in for a lab environment, I don't give a rat's ass about Windows Firewall. I have taken other precautions. Now, what I did up here was just refresh this, so you can see it refreshes all this here. Now, the other thing I'm not going to do is I'm not going to go down to Windows Updates, because I'm going to use the WSUS offline update tool, to where you download all the updates one time and then you apply them. And I'll show you that here in a minute. And the other thing you might want to do, if you're going to do those updates through using Windows Update, you may want to turn off Internet Explorer Enhanced Security Configuration. I turn it off for administrators. Again, best practices says don't do that. You're putting your network at risk. Yeah, I know. But it's not that big of a risk, and frankly, it's more trouble than, or they make it out to be more trouble than it is. Now, here's the thing. I want to go get that Windows Update file, the ISO file that I created for Windows Server 2016, Windows 10. They're the same update file. But it's an ISO file, and it's located over on my production network. So how am I going to do that? Let's see if I can do that here. Alright, now I'm going to click on File Explorer here, and I'm going to do it like I normally would. I'm going to go back, double backslash, and go mcs-nas, and I'm going to see if it finds it. Now, it's not going to find it. Why is it not going to find it? Well, think about it. We're on the 20 subnet. We have our own DNS server. It has no idea of the mcs.local network. But there is another way to skin this cat if you're into skinning cats. If you know the IP address of that server you're trying to connect to, we may be able to connect to it that way. So I know what that IP address is. It is 192.168.5.2, I believe. Bingo. And it even prompts us to log in. So over there I'm known as Adama. Now look carefully at this screen. You think that's going to work? I don't. Why don't I think it's going to work? Because it says domain MCS Lab. So what I want to do is do adama at mcs.local. I want it to know, hey, I want to log onto this domain as adama. Click on OK. Oh, let me see if I entered my password correctly. And I have. But the only thing I see over there is video, because I put the wrong damn IP address in, I bet you. So let's go back one, and I'm going to do /192.168.5.3. And do adama at cs.local. See if that one works. And it does. So now I'm able to go over to my applications folder, and I'm able to retrieve this file down here at my Windows offline updates, because I create ISO files. So there's my Windows 10 64-bit. So I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it here in the root. And you see, even though I'm in a virtual machine, and even though I'm going across to a separate subnet, my speeds are still pretty good. They fall off, and then they'll go back up here. So I've copied that file over, but there's one more thing I want to do before I get into doing the updates, and that's I want to go back into Server Manager, because you remember it added the DNS server to this server, but what it didn't add is the DHCP server. So I want to go ahead and get my DHCP server set up before I start doing updates. So we have to go back into Server Manager to do that. So we'll go back to the local server just because that's where I like to start at. And then we're going to go up here to Manage, Add Roles and Features. Next. It's a role-based or feature-based installation. Next. We want to install it on this server. Next. And we're looking for DHCP server. So I'm going to click that box and then let it install the management tools and the sub tools. So I'm going to go ahead and add the feature, click on next here, next again, and then install. And we'll let that run, and we'll come back and show you what the screen looks like when that's done. So that feature's been installed, the configuration is required, but installation has succeeded. So we'll go ahead and close. And now if you look again up here, we have another notification, and it says configuration required for DHCP server at 2016 Lab 1. So I'm going to click on complete. Okay, in the following steps, we're going to create a security group for delegation for DHCP. It says create the following security groups, authorize, and if domain joined. So it's going to supposedly take care of these steps for us. So let's click on next. We're going to use the following credentials. That's fine. The administrator account. I'm going to go ahead and commit. And it looks like it's done it. And I'm going to close. Now I've still got 2 more notifications here. Okay, it's just letting me know it completed the task. Now you would think, intuitively, you would think, I come right over here to DHCP. No, that's not where you do it. You have to actually come up here to Tools and go to DHCP from here. So let's expand that. So what we're looking for is 2 green check marks, which we have there. That means the server has been authorized on this network. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to, I believe, right click and create a new scope. Tell it next, and I'm just going to call this MCS Lab. And we'll call it MCS Lab Scope. Whatever you want to call it, really doesn't matter. Just something so you can keep it. Now I like to start my IP addresses at 26. I leave 1 through 25 available for servers, Internet of Things, that kind of thing. Then I start my IP addresses for my workstations at 26. And I only need a few, so I'm only going to go from 26 to 99. So I'm going to type in here 192.168.20.26 to start, and 192.168.20.99 as a stopping point. I'm not going to add any exclusions here. We'll leave the lease duration at 8 days. And now it's asking me if I want to configure some of the options like DNS, Win setting, etc. And I do. So the first thing I'm going to do is enter our gateway. So that's 192.168.20.254. That's the Ubiquity gateway that we assigned earlier. The mcslab.local. Now, my server is already in here, 20.1. But I could also add another IP address in here. And I could just enter it like this. And add. And what it'll do is it'll verify it. It'll verify that it's an actual DNS server. Now what that's going to do is in DHCP, it's going to hand out 2 IP addresses for DNS server. The first one is going to be my Active Directory DNS server. The second one's going to be Google. I could even add, if I wanted to, I think that's a valid Google server, the secondary. So what it's going to do is it's going to hand out, when it hands out an IP address to a client, it's going to also tell it what DNS servers are available. And it's going to always default to the 20.1 because it's the first one in there. No. Let's do 208.67.22. Oops, sorry. 208.67.220.220, which is OpenDNS, I believe. Yeah, it is. And then we'll click next. And we don't have any Win servers, so we're not going to worry about that. And then it asks me the all-important question, do I want to activate that scope? And I'm going to tell it yes. Now we have 2 Active Directory DHCP servers on the same physical cable. But they're separated, they're subnetted, and they're VLANed. So they're not going to interfere with it either, with anyone else. So I shouldn't see any address leases or I should see the address pool. But if I refresh this, I should not see any leases because there is actually nothing on this subnet other than the server that is getting a DNS, or an IP address. Hopefully what I just said makes sense. Now I'm going to go ahead and close DHCP and I'm going to close the server manager. So for shits and giggles, let's test that to make sure that this thing is actually giving out a DHCP address. And we're going to do that by bringing up another virtual machine, one of my lab machines. We'll bring up this enterprise unit, but the first thing I need to do is go into settings and make sure under the network that this is a member of Vlan 20, so that it knows to get its IP address, that it knows it's a member of Vlan 20 and it's a member of the 20.subnet. And then I'm going to go ahead and connect to it and we'll fire it up and we'll see if it actually gets a DHCP IP address from the DHCP server. Alright, view. For some reason I shrunk that window, I don't know why. I'm going to go ahead and log in here. Right, well, hopefully it'll let me log in this time. So anytime you have a computer that's been, this is why when you initially create your Windows machines, you should always create a user, a backdoor user, separate from the domain. When you initially set up Windows 10, oh god, it's got updates for me. I should have done this on a Windows 7 machine. So if I would have just been patient, here's Windows 10, and look what it says here. Oh wow, mcslab.local. Do you want to allow your PC to be discoverable? Well, sure. So it is automatically, just by changing that Vlan identification, it now knows it's part of Vlan 20, and it knows to go to this 2016 Lab1 machine down here to get its IP address. And just to verify that, we can do a couple things. So let's first come down here to the Windows Server machine, and let's go into DHCP. It's under Windows Administrative Tools. And let's bring up the DHCP server interface and see if it's given out an IP address. And there you go, 20.26, and even Windows 7 has now got 20.27. So the DHCP server is working. That wasn't hard at all, was it? Now let's come to the machine actually, and let's go look at the network card, pardon me. Open network and internet settings, and let's see what it actually has in here. Change it after settings. There we go. So let's go over here and go to status and go to details. And look right here at DNS servers. So you can see our Active Directory DNS server is first, our Google server is second, and our OpenDNS server is third. And now you know the reasoning why I do that. So that even if our Active Directory DNS server were down, I can still get out and translate IP addresses to, or internet names to IP addresses without the domain controller needing to be up. That's a very important step. You need to make sure you put that in any of your DHCP servers, but especially with Active Directory, it should always be the first DNS server, and then your others as alternates. Otherwise, if your Active Directory domain controller went down, you'd have to come in here manually enter an IP address for DNS servers. It could be a bit of a pain in the ass. So there you go. Alright, so the last thing I'm going to show you on this video is how to start the updates. Now, normally I would just say, go out to Windows Update and let it run. But I don't like to download updates 100 times. I like to download them once and then apply them to multiple PCs. So that's the way I choose to do it. If you want it easy, cheap, and simple, just go out and let it do your updates automatically. But I'm going to use this Windows offline updater. And so I'm going to right click on it and mount it because it's an ISO, so you can mount it like a hard drive. And then I'm just going to run this update installer multiple times until this thing tells me that it no longer has any more updates to install. And then this machine will be ready. So we'll go ahead and this will run in the background, and it's going to take quite a bit of time. But I just wanted to show you this is how I do it. For sake of simplicity, if you don't have a bunch of servers or workstations to update, it might just be easier for you to go out to Windows Update and do it through there. So what we've been able to do in this lab series, and this is like the start of a new lab, like this is how you would set up your own internal lab separate from your own production network. But I've cheated a little bit, and I've gotten some really great equipment in here. The Ubiquity, the Unify access, the Unify software, the Ubiquity hardware, the switches, the Unify security gateway, and the access points, all tied together with a very simple interface. You saw how easy it was to set up another corporate network on there. I could set up, I think it's 254 is the limit for corporate, so I could have VLAN after VLAN after VLAN and do it. This is also the benefit of virtualization. One box, one network card, and then you share all the other resources on your network. And you still have the ability to isolate all those subnets from one another. So I hope the lights are going on and you're starting to get how some of this stuff works. Because I don't want to affect my production network. I don't want maintenance on my lab network to affect my corporate, knock anything down. This way it keeps everything nice and separate. We've managed to set up a different subnet. We've installed Windows Server 2016. We've configured it as a domain controller. We've set up a DNS server. It did that automatically. And we manually set up a DHCP server. And I showed you how to put IP addresses in there for alternate DNS servers. So in the event that your Active Directory server goes down, your workstations on that lab or / production network will have access to a DNS server out on the internet. So there you go. Easy peasy if you have the right equipment here. All told, so that Dell server was a couple $100. It came with 24 gig of RAM and 12 core processors and hard drives. I've had hard drives for it, put them in. And the Ubiquity equipment. Couldn't be easier, huh? Now, if you want to get your feet wet with the command line, you can go out and you can purchase used Cisco equipment all day and get familiar with they call it iOS, not to be confused with Apple's iOS, but Cisco calls it the same thing. So if you want to go out and play around with the command line, there's a bunch of great videos out there that can teach you how to set up VLANs with Cisco equipment. I'm not going to go into that. I just don't have the patience for it. So there you go, episode 1 of our new Windows Lab series, where I'm trying to tie in all the stuff that I've been doing over the past few months. You know, sometimes I jump around on my videos because I don't have the equipment here to do the video I want to. So what I'll do is I'll move on to something else till the equipment comes in and then do a video on it. So there's going to be a lot more videos coming up in the Windows Lab series. We're gonna show you some tips and tricks and group policy and that kind of thing, like I promised. Now that I have the Ubiquity equipment in, and I can manage my underlying, and I can treat my local area network as a virtual network, as well as creating my machines as virtual machines or virtual servers. So it all ties in together, it all comes back. And we'll be covering stuff on VLANs and that kind of thing. So hope you found the video entertaining and informative as always. Give us a thumbs up down below if you liked it. Leave your comments in the comment section. If you're so inclined you want to donate so we can buy more wonderful equipment to help support this channel, we accept PayPal and we accept Patreon donations. So either one. I don't cross post on Patreon anymore, and I have reasons for that. But you can check my Twitter. Twitter will announce when I do a new update. I put it on Facebook, and you should get a notification if you've clicked on the notification bell down below by the comments section. So again, thanks for watching so much. We appreciate it. Donate if you can. If you can't, that's fine. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays to everybody. Got some more videos coming up soon, but for now, we'll see you on the other side.